Tonight at 10, prepare for more flooding and higher temperatures as scientists warn climate change is already having an impact on the UK. Last year was one of Britain's warmest, wettest and sunniest years ever recorded.
Climate change isn't just something that's going to happen in 2050 or we need to worry about towards the end of the century. We are seeing this very clearly in our observations now.
Now, experts are calling for radical action to help prevent the worst consequences of climate change. Also tonight, more young people are being urged to get the coronavirus vaccine as the government scientist warns of a bumpy autumn and winter ahead. Alarm in Japan as new COVID cases surge to record highs, but the Tokyo Games will go on, say officials. And after a golden week in the pool, we hear from British swimmer Tom Dean, who says he still can't believe what has happened.
Even now, it's not really sinking in. I woke up this morning, I looked at these 2 gold medals and I thought, they're actually mine, so it's amazing.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News channel, she trained at the London Olympic venue. Now she's an Olympic medalist. Mallory Franklin wins silver for Team GB.
Good evening. A landmark report from the Met Office has found the UK is almost a degree Celsius warmer than 30 years ago as climate change takes hold. We've been experiencing some pretty extreme weather conditions over the last few weeks, from heat waves to flash flooding. And scientists say climate change is a major cause of that. With its impact being felt across the UK, scientists are warning of the need to prepare for higher temperatures and more flooding. In the space of 30 years, the UK has become 0.9 degrees Celsius warmer and 6% wetter. 2020 was the 3rd warmest, the 5th wettest and the 8th sunniest year on record, the first time all 3 have been in the top 10 at the same time. Our science correspondent Rebecca Morell has this report.
The changes we're seeing are dramatic. This week's storms leading to flash flooding in the south of England. In Ilford in Essex, rainwater poured into Anisha's garden and garage, taking the family by surprise.
So we turned off the electricity in the garage. I tried making a barrier in the garage to stop more water coming in, but it didn't really help. And yeah, we were just worried about what to do because we've never experienced anything like this before.
These extremes are the focus of a new report that assessed the UK's climate in 2020. From the hottest day recorded in Heathrow, London, where temperatures reached 37.8 degrees, to the coldest in Braemar, Aberdeenshire, that hit a low of minus 10.3 degrees, to rain in October with the wettest day on record, and wind in the Isle of Wight, with gusts reaching over 100 miles an hour. The report says the UK is getting warmer, wetter and sunnier.
We can see very clearly from our observations that the UK's climate is already changing. So climate change isn't just something that's going to happen in 2050 or we need to worry about towards the end of the century. We are seeing this very clearly in our observations now.
The report compared the most recent 3 decades with the 30 years before. This map shows the UK is warming. The darker the red, the bigger the temperature increase, and everywhere is now hotter by an average of 0.9 degrees. But East Anglia and the East Midlands have warmed by more than 1 degree. This map shows the changes in average rainfall. Dark blue means more rain, and the UK is now an average of 6% wetter. But across much of Scotland, the increase is more than 10%. It's putting immense strain on the UK's infrastructure. Extreme heat halting trains as tracks buckle. But scientists warn of worse to come, with future temperatures reaching over 40 degrees.
What's interesting about this report is there's lots of data in there. So there's lots of temperature records and percentage changes. But actually what we're seeing are the impacts to us as humans, to our businesses, to ecology across the UK. It really is being played out in front of our eyes.
Come rain or shine, the world will be heading to Glasgow later this year for the United Nations Climate Summit. And we'll find out if governments can rise to the challenge of cutting emissions to stop the worst effects of climate change.
We need deep and rapid emissions reduction, that we also need to remove the excess greenhouse gases we've put into the atmosphere, which are creating these major problems today. And thirdly, we need to repair those parts of the climate system that have passed their tipping point.
Right now, the elements show no signs of letting up, and scientists will continue to track and analyse these events. But they warn that extremes are becoming the new normal.
And Rebecca is with me now. So a stark warning, scientists saying very much this is happening now. It's not something that's going to be happening in decades to come.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think we're moving away from this idea of climate change being something in the future, happening in some far off, distant place. It's here, it's now, it's on our doorstep. And it's not just the UK. In the last few weeks, we've seen extreme heat waves in Canada, wildfires in Siberia, devastating floods in Europe, more devastating floods in China. We're seeing the effects of climate change everywhere. So what can we do about this? Well, some of these changes are already baked into the system. There's more greenhouse gas emissions up there in the atmosphere. Global temperatures have risen. The air is holding more moisture. There's more rain. But we can stop things from getting worse. And there are changes that each of us can make, from decisions about the food we eat to the transport we use. But really, this is going to require a bigger fundamental shift, phasing out fossil fuels and getting our greenhouse gas emissions down to zero, which is why the climate talks happening in November in Glasgow, where world leaders are going to gather, is just so crucial. But scientists are saying we're beyond the point of pledges and promises. We need action. We need every country to set out exactly what it's going to do to cut its greenhouse gas emissions. And these are going to be really big changes that affect all of us.
Rebecca, thank you. England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jonathan Van Tam, says he hopes the worst of the coronavirus pandemic is behind us, but he has warned there could be 1 or 2 bumpy periods ahead as autumn approaches. He has urged people who've not yet been vaccinated to come forward. The latest data from Public Health England suggests that COVID vaccines have prevented an estimated 22 million infections and 60,000 deaths in England alone. Here's our health correspondent, Sophie Hutchinson.
After the misery of many months with the pandemic, the thrill of the holidays, the NHS in England went to Thorpe Park today to encourage its younger visitors to get vaccinated.
Hi guys, we're doing COVID vaccines today.
I just want to be more safe and know that I'm okay, and also when everything's open now, so I can have more freedom.
Did you see that? There's something about being fearless when you're young. And perhaps that's what's being played out with the vaccinations. Unlike with the older generation who went full throttle to get immunised, a significant proportion of younger people are still dragging their feet over getting the jab and getting protected.
The numbers of those being immunised are continuing to rise, but there's a stark difference between the age groups. More than 30% of 18 to 29-year-olds in England still haven't had a single dose of the vaccine. Compare that to the over 60s, where 90% have now had 2 jabs. And today, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer was answering questions from young people on BBC News about the vaccine.
I was wondering, why would I or any other young person be inclined to get the vaccine for individual reasons?
The idea that COVID is less serious to the young is right, but the idea that it is not pretty serious indeed for some young people is sadly wrong.
In Glasgow, health officials have taken the jabs on a bus to Hampden Park, the national football stadium, in an attempt to persuade more younger people to get immunised.
Just was kind of waiting to see. I'm not, against it or anything like that. It was just a case of not yet.
Many have not been able to enjoy a day out. A record of nearly 700,000 were pinged by the NHS app, advising them to self-isolate. For those young people who want to continue to go out, it seems increasingly likely that being double jabbed will be the key. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
The number of daily coronavirus cases has risen for the second day in a row after a week of falls. The latest government figures show there were 31,117 new cases in the latest 24-hour period, though that number is down on this time last week. There were an average of 29,238 new cases per day in the past 7 days. 85 deaths were recorded in the last 24 hours, meaning an average of 71 deaths in the past week. The number of people in hospital with COVID has risen slightly again to 6,034. More than 88.4% of UK adults have now had their first jab, and more than 71.4% are now fully vaccinated. Well, President Biden has tonight ordered millions of American government workers to get vaccinated or else face compulsory COVID testing and restrictions. The White House is struggling with surging infection rates driven by the Delta variant, with only half the population vaccinated, and his measures to encourage more people to get the jab have gone even further.
Today, I'm calling on all states and local governments to use funding they have received, including from the American Rescue Plan, to give $100 to anyone who gets fully vaccinated. I know the paying people to get vaccinated might sound unfair to folks who've gotten vaccinated already. But here's the deal. If incentives help us beat this virus, I believe we should use them.
Well, I'm joined from Washington by correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher. So he's even offering money. He wants people to be paid to have the jab, a sign of the challenge ahead.
That's right, Sophie. I mean, he made this speech because he's up against a wall, really. All those people who were open to getting vaccinated, they've already got the jab. He made it as easy as possible for them. But that significant number of Americans who haven't gotten the vaccine, that's where the virus is spreading. And they're not listening to him. They're listening to social media. They're listening to right-wing pundits and politicians who are spinning conspiracy theories and telling them the vaccine is unsafe. So in this speech, the president did a full-on Joe Biden-style appeal to them. He tried to dispel misinformation. He pleaded with them to get the vaccine. He announced incentives, but also enforcement. Now, he can't force them to take action, but he can force action with federal employees. So that's everyone from civil servants to park rangers to aviation officials. And they will have to get vaccinated. They won't be fired if they don't, but if they refuse, they have to get tested once or twice a week. And there will be opposition to that. Already, unions have started to challenge that idea. But still, the federal government is the largest employer in the country. So we're talking about millions of people. And the president is hoping that this will set an example for other employers around the country.
Barbara Plett-Usher in Washington, thank you. Well, in Japan, coronavirus cases are surging to their highest levels since the start of the pandemic, with more than 10,000 new infections in a day for the first time. The Japanese authorities say the dramatic rise will not affect the Olympics, but experts are warning if something isn't done to control the spread of the Delta variant in Tokyo, the city's healthcare system could soon be overwhelmed. Fewer than 30% of the Japanese population are fully vaccinated. From Tokyo, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports.
This is Tokyo, in the middle of a state of emergency, in the middle of a pandemic. These bars are not supposed to be serving alcohol and should be closed by 8 o'clock. But no one is taking any notice. I'm not worried at all, this young man says. I want to go drinking. I want to go out drinking. Lots of people want to stay at home, his girlfriend says, but we all have our limits. The Japanese government says this behaviour has nothing to do with the Games, but even its own advisors disagree.
What we really need to have is the leadership by the governors or even for the prime ministers. And those people may have kind of the mixed messages. Now that we have the Olympics, so the people may not really be cautious to the COVID-19.
Critics call this the Olympic effect. And we saw it last week on the streets around the Olympic Stadium during the opening ceremony. And it's all happening in a country where most people under the age of 50 remain completely unvaccinated. The Japanese government is now telling young people to go out and get vaccinated as soon as possible. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, this is all the paperwork you need. This is actually for my son. And then you go on one of the government websites and make a booking. Now, most of the places that I've tried to make a booking today have been offering slots in mid-September. although I have managed to find one place which is offering a slot in mid-August, which means he could be fully vaccinated by the beginning of October.
Is in the gold medal position. Whoa!
But others here say the Olympics is going much better than expected. And despite record infections, there were just 8 COVID deaths in the whole of Japan yesterday. Is the threat being exaggerated?
The mood must have been quite jolly before the Titanic sunk. There is a time lag between the hole in the ship and the actual sinking taking place. There is a time lag between the rise of infection and the rise of the seriously ill patients inundating the hospitals and leading to the collapse of the medical system.
At the current rate of increase, Tokyo's COVID wards could be full before the Olympic closing ceremony happens at the end of next week. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in Tokyo.
Some of the day's other news now, and a Liverpool fan who suffered life-changing injuries in the Hillsborough disaster in 1989 has died. A coroner has confirmed that he was the 97th victim of the tragedy. Andrew Devine was 22 when he was crushed in the crowd during Liverpool's FA Cup semi-final and spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Liverpool's players paid tribute to him today. The RNLI says it's been overwhelmed by a huge level of support following accusations that its rescue work was assisting migrants. The lifeboat charity received more than £200,000 in donations in 24 hours after it posted pictures of rescuing people crossing the Channel. Downing Street has praised its work. A National Holocaust Memorial is to be built next to the Houses of Parliament. The proposals, which include 23 large bronze sculptures, were previously rejected by Westminster Council, but the government has ruled in favour of the plans. The Board of Deputies of British Jews said it was delighted. The number of people on furlough has fallen sharply to below 2 million, with younger people coming off the scheme twice as fast as any other age group. At the peak of the pandemic, nearly 9 million people were on furlough. At the end of June, it was down to 1.9. The scheme will be wound up by the end of September, and from next week, firms are being asked to make a bigger contribution. Our Consumer Affairs correspondent Coletta Smith reports.
Leah Bailey has been able to spend a lot more time with little Ava than she was expecting.
Yay!
After maternity leave, she had 11 months on furlough. Then this April, she took a call from her manager.
She hit me with the news that I'm at risk of being made redundant. 2-3 weeks later, I got the phone call. I'm so sorry, Leah, but you're being made redundant. There's nothing. She said I tried my hardest to try and juggle people's jobs around in the office to kind of find your stuff, but there's just not enough work for the people in the office.
And that's hard when you'd been on furlough for so long, hoping and expecting to go back into work.
I burst out crying. It was really scary. I had a little girl to support and I had a roof over our heads to do and bills to pay, and yeah, it was horrible. How's it going now with the puppy?
Jo has been on the other end of those decisions throughout the pandemic. She runs this small promotions company in Stockport and says decisions around furlough have been really hard.
My team have been with me a long time. You know, most of them have worked for me for years. You know them very well. You know their family circumstances. You're trying to weigh up perhaps some of their financial circumstances. Who can you keep in, who can you not?
Because the business has changed so dramatically this year, to stay on top, Jo says she's had to let one person go.
We had a member of staff that had been with me a few years, but I really felt that it was an account management role, and I just felt that that wasn't what the business was going to need.
From next week, businesses are going to have to start paying more for every member of staff still not back at work, forcing many companies to start making those difficult choices. Today's figures show fewer people on furlough than ever before, with the real boost coming as hospitality and retail opened up again. But for the 1.9 million people still on furlough, the risk of redundancy is increasing.
Yes, Mummy's on your bike.
Leah has had an extra mountain to climb. Maternity leave and then furlough meant nearly 2 years out of the workplace. But after a couple of months searching, she's managed to find a new job.
It was just one of those things. You just have to do it, don't you? Especially when you've got children, you just have to get on with it. You have to do it. You have to be strong for them.
Coletta Smith, BBC News in Rochdale.
Bitcoin. It's a virtual or online currency. Like all so-called cryptocurrencies, it's essentially a computer file stored in a kind of digital wallet. For now, there are very few things you can actually buy with Bitcoin, but it can be traded online. And every day, more Bitcoins are created, or mined, as it's called. And it's this process of mining that uses thousands of energy-hungry computers and vast amounts of electricity. That's why virtual currencies are coming under increased scrutiny over their potential environmental impact. Our North America technology reporter, James Clayton, has been given rare access to a Bitcoin mine in upstate New York that has its own gas-fired power plant.
This is an energy plant with a big difference. A former New York coal plant, its owners Greenwich Generation have decided to bring it back to life, converting it into a gas-fired power station with a twist.
What's happening here is part of a modern-day gold rush, but they're not mining minerals here, they're mining Bitcoin.
Bitcoin is a type of virtual money or cryptocurrency made up of computer code that you can mostly buy and sell online. These thousands of computers are competing to verify the millions of Bitcoin transactions happening around the world, and if they succeed, they're rewarded with a new Bitcoin. They're essentially creating money online. One Bitcoin is currently worth over £28,000, and these computers need a lot of energy.
The unique thing about this plant is that it both generates electricity and mines Bitcoin. So these are the turbines here that actually create the energy. And then literally right next to it,
you have computers that are using that electricity to make Bitcoin. Globally, Cambridge University estimates that the amount of energy used to mine a year's worth of Bitcoin is equivalent to around a quarter of the UK's annual energy use. Greenwich argues that because it uses gas, it's greener than Bitcoin mines that use coal in the US and China, and they've pledged to invest in a solar energy plant. But the process still generates carbon dioxide that Greenwich says they offset.
We're 100% carbon neutral in our Bitcoin mining operation.
But you're still putting fossil fuels into the air. You wouldn't need to offset them if this didn't happen.
Right, this is a gas plant, and approximately 50% of the grid in New York State is powered by natural gas. So, like all natural gas plants, whether it's in New York or the rest of the country, this plant does emit carbon.
Some local politicians, though, are concerned.
Do you want Greenwich to close down?
Personally, it absolutely should. It should not be using fossil fuel to run these computer processors to benefit a few people on Wall Street for what? It's not worth it.
Politicians around the world are still trying to work out how to deal with Bitcoin's greedy energy consumption. Companies like Greenwich think that they're the future, but plenty of others think that reopening plants like this is a step in the wrong direction. James Clayton, BBC News.
To the Tokyo Olympics now, where Team GB have added 2 medals to their tally on day 6. Mallory Franklin won silver in the canoe slalom event, the first time her class C1 has been included for women at the Olympics. And Matthew Coward-Holly claimed bronze in the men's trap shooting. But disappointment for one of the country's biggest rowing stars, Helen Glover, and her partner Polly Swan, who came 4th in the women's pair. There was no fairy tale comeback for Helen Glover, who was going for her 3rd Olympic gold after giving birth to twins last year. But this was her message to her 3 children.
I love you so much. You've been my inspiration. I never saw myself getting back in a rowing boat until you guys came along, especially Kit and Bo in the lockdown. And I just want to say that you can do anything you want to do. Trying and failing is no problem as long as you try.
Well, this was Maidenhead in Berkshire in the very early hours of Tuesday morning. The family and friends of the British swimmer, Tom Dean, as he was going for gold. And these images went viral on social media, showing just how much the Olympics means not just to the athletes, but to everyone around them. And Tom did, of course, win not just 1, but 2 gold medals at the Games, becoming the first British male swimmer in 113 years to get 2 at one Games. He's been talking to our sports editor, Dan Roan, about his whirlwind past few days.
Tom Dean, you've just won the Olympic Games on the 200 metres freestyle.
Congratulations on everything that's happened the last couple of days. How do you reflect on it now?
It's been a whirlwind, and even now it's not really sinking in. I woke up this morning, I looked at these 2 gold medals and I thought, you know, they're actually mine, so it's amazing.
Did you surprise yourself?
You can't go into it thinking you're not going to be able to do it, because then you've kind of written yourself off at that point already. So the 200, it was going to be tight. Luckily I got my hand on that wall first. 4/100th separating us both. I think, you know, it's really fingertip stuff.
I must ask you about the video of your family back home. It's gone viral, of course.
My mum's going crazy. Oh my God.
Who can you see there?
I can see all my family. I can see my neighbour. All my brothers and sisters. I could watch this video so many times, honestly. See, I thought, you know, being 1 or 2 neighbours or something like that, and I look and it's just, you know, it looked like half of Maidenhead were there. It was amazing. I always had a hunch that my mum would put on a big party. She loves putting on a big party, so and I think that shows how much it means to people back home.
I must ask you about COVID quickly, because lots been written about this recovery. How ill were you?
I think I was the first athlete in any Olympic sport within Great Britain to have a reinfection case.
Right.
You know, I'm coughing and wheezing, and I'm doing a sport that requires so heavily on your lungs and heart. I'm thinking, how am I going to be able to get back to the brutal training that it requires? But luckily, no long-lasting effects, and here I am, hopefully with it behind me for good.
This is wonderful. Duncan Scott, can you get the world record? It's gold to Great Britain. Well done, guys. Tom Dean is a double Olympic champion.
I mean, how wonderful was it to have that as well and to get a second?
Like a dream come true. The 4 guys I shared the podium with were, you know, the 4 best guys I could possibly imagine.
Swimming's right up there, very, very competitive. So this is a major achievement, right, by Britain.
This is it for us, and if we can put on a good show here, I think it's going to just bring up the sport within the country and get it into kind of the limelight a bit more, which is where it should be, and kind of bring it into the centre of people's focus, because, you know, Team GB and British swimming are here to stay.
What a week he has had. Tom Dean speaking to Dan Roan in Tokyo. And that is it from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Good night.